Can you talk a bit about, like, when you say pre-sales engineering, right? Like that didn't even exist, right? Like that whole concept, right? Or maybe it was just kind of formulated.
Yeah, in my mind, I didn't even know what that was, and effectively, like, it was a domain that existed in the software industry, especially B2B sort of enterprise software, which is where my career has been, where, you're selling to complex organizations. You obviously have a seller who's managing that sales process and positioning and is more of a business sort of oriented role. But then for highly technologically complex solutions, you need an engineer who can explain to the customer the value, give demos, do proof of concept implementations, and really prove that, okay, this is something they can use. And that's a very hands-on kind of technical role, but it is in the context of helping grow the business and driving revenue. And so it was very much sort of at the center of business and technology. And I was attracted to that generalized concept, but I didn't really know what that role was. I kind of found myself into it. But then that really kicked off my whole career. Is sort of that characteristic of the intersection of business and technology, and certainly pre-sales engineering being a strong expression of that.
And you said a really interesting word that we've heard a lot, which is curiosity or intellectual curiosity. Do you have, I guess, why, when you see that as an executive now, why is that such an important trait? And then do you have any suggestions for cultivating curiosity, especially while you're in school?
You hear the term kind of continuous learning. To me, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like, I obviously have a very busy role like many people, but I spend, most of my time when I'm commuting listening to podcasts about new topics that I don't know about, whether it's directly related to my job or just, stuff more broadly. And I think, the best employees and the highest performing people, I think in general, highly correlate to those that have a mindset of, I don't know everything and I want to be constantly learning. And that expresses itself in a business context as well, right? In terms of, it's not just put blinders on and do what it was the tasks that were given to me, but understand how it fits into the bigger picture of the organization and asking the question and saying, hey, how does the finance team think about this? Or what does the marketing team do all day long? Or what is a product manager? Like, just even understanding that and how the dots connect, to me, makes whatever job you do in that life cycle, it makes you much better at it, because now you can connect the dots and understand how it connects to everything else that's happening, and ultimately the customer value that an organization is trying to deliver.
How, as a leader, what culture do you think you create on your teams, or what's the focus from a leadership perspective that students can really learn?
Acting like an owner, it's one of our key things we express in our values, but it's not like it's just some, nice words on a wall. It actually means, like, when you see something that can be improved, or even if it's something that's outside your remit, that you feel like an ownership to go solve that problem or help your colleagues or peers or whatnot, get what they need to be done. Or if something isn't going well, to be intellectually honest about, what's working and what's not in the organization, and really have that kind of ownership mindset. I think that was critical. Like, and at that point I was like, I was like, this is a huge career inflection moment for me if we can get this transformation right. And I recognize that. So I felt like I had to do everything possible, including moving back east, to kind of make that happen. And so, I think that sort of spirit of acting like an owner and really kind of then of course having the resilience and the adaptability to be able to execute around that was kind of what made it happen. And therefore, how do you empower a team to do that? You coach individuals, you train individuals, people observe how you operate, and that creates sort of a compounding effect at a much larger scale. Obviously now the companies are 10x the size of when I joined, and I can't be the one doing everything. So we have to instill it in the culture and the processes and the expectations of how we expect people to work.
If you had to look back on in college today or suggest, would there be one thing that you over-index on? Like, is it more networking, more different classes from different areas, kind of like a Steve Jobs style? What would you suggest to focus on?
I would say definitely, I believe in cross-disciplinary knowledge being a real advantage, and it ties to the whole adjacencies, for all the stuff we talked about earlier. So if I had to pull on one thing, I think it's a combination of giving yourself like the ability to take more classes outside of your necessarily core domain, because that's an educational version of the same thing we were talking about earlier. It just gives you a different perspective, different skills that even if you can't direct line connect to your job, like it's going to impact the way you think about your job in a way that's probably differentiating versus others who may have a more narrow sort of field of skill set. So I think that's kind of one. The other is just like be open-minded to opportunities. Like sometimes the best things happen to you and they weren't planned, and you got to take a little bit of a leap of faith. And like I mentioned at the beginning, the downside risk of doing so when you're early in your career journey is quite low. And now it feels scary. It's high stakes because it's all like relative. At the time, it will feel like it's more, but in the grand scheme of things in your career and your life, it's not going to be as high stakes as probably later. And so I would encourage people to be open-minded and take a bit of risk and new challenges.